Okay, hi there. This is a short guide to a quote bank that I've put together for Macbeth. I think it's much better if you can, for you to design your own ones, but then possibly to work through these, check that there aren't any quotations you'd want to use that I've picked. But the best way to learn the quotations is to put them together yourself and to choose them yourselves. Okay, I've gone through these act by act. I'd advise reading the How to Create a Quote Bank first. That's on Justice Landing with the template that you can print out to fill in yourself. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're looking at Act 1. There'll be a film for Act 2, a short film for Act 3, and a short film for Act 5. Okay, so the first quotation in Act 1, Scene 1, the witches. We're introduced to them, very short scene, just the three witches. And one of the quotations I've picked out is, fair is foul, and foul is fair. Now, we need a literary technique to be able to analyse that, so the alliteration and the oxymoron both foreshadow the Gothic unnatural deeds that are going to appear later in the play. The witches speak also in a different rhythm from the rest of the characters in the play. Nearly every Shakespeare play, in fact every one I've ever studied apart from this one, has continual iambic pentameter, apart from many switches to prose. That's 10 syllables a line. However, in Macbeth, the witches continually speak in 6 or 7 syllable lines, and this means that he's using a different meter, which only has what's called 3 feet in the rhythm, because a foot is 2 syllables together. So pentameter is 5 feet, 10 syllables. And they're speaking in 3 pairs of syllables, so 3 feet. And the use of 3 feet in their rhythm is symbolic of their witchcraft, as 3 was seen as a magic number. Okay. The social context that you could connect with using this quotation at any point is that James I, who Shakespeare seemed to be wishing to please by writing this play, he was obsessed with witches. He wrote a book called Demonology, all about witchcraft, and so it would have appealed to him. The themes that this could be included in is Gothic. It's quite a Gothic theme, the fact that foul and fair, the oxymoron, the paradox, are placed next to each other. It's unnatural. Fair things should not be foul, and vice versa. And it's also possibly another theme that comes up in the play is fate. Almost that from this first scene, it's almost destined that Macbeth's life is going to be turned upside down. Okay, next. So in Act 1, Scene 2, the sergeant tells King Duncan about the battle that's going on and what's been happening. And we hear Macbeth described. And the sergeant says, for brave Macbeth, well he deserved that name. Now, the adjective brave shows the high status and respect that Macbeth is given by other characters in the play, especially at the start. And this is in keeping with Aristotelian tragic heroes. I'll explain that in a second. The social context that would go with this is that you could say tragedies at the time followed Aristotle's template, and in Aristotelian tragedies the hero should begin the play in a position of high status, and his tragic flaw will lead him to a tragic descent towards death by the end of the play. And that's what happens to Macbeth. He's respected at the beginning, as we see here, and by the end he dies. And his tragic flaw perhaps is either ambition or the fact that he's so proud that his wife can play on these ideas of his manhood, and that he refuses to accept her insults and does whatever she says. Okay, themes that are shown in this quotation is bravery, and also manly virtues, the idea of gender as well. Okay, next quotation. The sergeant also says in the same scene, and this is quite important in this quotation, he talks about Macbeth, and he says that Macbeth on the battlefield unseamed him from the nave to the chaps. And what that means is he cut him open from his navel to his face. The violent imagery here highlights the violence of the society that Macbeth comes from, and also lets the audience know that Macbeth is capable of inflicting such violence on others. The social context here is perhaps, you could say, the violence is fitting with Macbeth's male role as a warrior. The violence also has suggestions of the violence that was exhibited in the Civil War 100 years earlier, the War of the Roses, in England, where family members murdered each other for power. So the themes that are shown here, again, are the gender, manly virtues, violence as well. Okay? So we now move on to Act 1, Scene 3. In this scene, the witches meet Banquo and Macbeth. They predict that Macbeth will be Thane of Cawdor, and that he will also be king, and that Banquo's children will be kings. And Banquo says, and this is quite interesting, he says, "New honours come upon him, like our strange garments, cleave not to their mould." Now this is more relevant a bit later, but there's this idea, this is quite advanced at this point, there's this idea that Macbeth is almost, it's his fate that dictates that all of this happens to him, and he's just a pawn or a puppet in what is already destined or what is already fated to happen to him. And the metaphor of his Macbeth's titles being ill-fitting clothing, they infer how fate can place humans in uncomfortable situations from which they are unable to escape. And the social context that goes with this, the concept of predestination and of fate, would have been debated in Shakespearean times, as the Renaissance had stimulated questions about divine predestination and whether fate really exists. So the theme I would put with this is fate. Okay, now in Act 1, Scene 4, Macbeth receives his title from the king, but before he does receive the title, he says to the king, "The service and the loyalty I owe in doing pays itself." Now the language here used, service, loyalty, owe, reveals the loyalty Macbeth values and that he wishes to show as king. And this is really ironic because he will soon be disloyal. You could argue it's dramatic irony because we know that he's already getting tempted to be disloyal. He's already wondering about being king himself. But obviously Duncan doesn't know that. Okay, social context-wise, such loyalty would have been expected in Shakespearean times, especially by James I, who, again, Shakespeare was trying to impress by writing this play. James I believed that kings were appointed by God, and even wrote a book on this called The Divine Right of Kings. The theme I would attach this to would be power. Okay? Act 1, Scene 5. Now in Act 1, Scene 5, we first meet Lady Macbeth. She receives a letter from Macbeth. He tells her about the witches. She's midway through reading that when the scene opens. And then she begins a soliloquy that's one of the most well-known speeches she gives. And she begins that with this: "The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements." Now there are 2 points I want to make about this. So the first one I want to make is that it's very dark animal imagery. So raven is a bird that's associated with death. It highlights the dark animal imagery highlights the unnatural, dark intentions of Lady Macbeth. The second point I wanted to make was the possessive pronoun she uses when she says "under my battlements," not our, not my husband's, just under my battlements, infers Lady Macbeth's position of control in her relationship. Now the social context of that would be a Shakespearean audience would not expect a female to be dominant in a relationship, as they lived in a very patriarchal society. The themes you could attach to this, well, it connects with Gothic theme because the black raven bird. It connects with power because she's feeling power under my battlements. It's got connections with the occult because the black bird would symbolize animals that would have been important in witchcraft, and also the idea of gender, the fact that she's saying my battlements, not our battlements. Okay. She then goes on to say in the same soliloquy, "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here." Now, there are two things that I want to point out in this quotation as well. The first is she uses this imperative verb, "come, you spirits," and she uses the word "come" 4 or 5 times, or 3 or 4 times in the soliloquy, each time commanding spirits to come to her. And the imperative verbs used throughout the soliloquy suggest that Lady Macbeth is delivering an incantation or a spell, which reminds us of the witches earlier in the play. Now, the social context you can attach to that is that the use of witchcraft, or the language of witchcraft, would shock the audience, and it would be at odds with what is accepted socially in Shakespeare's time. There was a growing puritanical culture in Jacobean society who would have condemned any sort of witchcraft. And the themes that you could attach to that would be Gothic transgression, power, occult, and even gender. But gender is shown more when you then focus on "unsex me here." The command to unsex me here highlights Lady Macbeth's desire to be given more manly attributes and lose her female qualities. And this gets quite a deep social context point. For a start, you've got the idea of the desire to reverse gender expectations would surprise the Shakespearean audience, who lived in a society where gender roles were strictly divided between men and women. Women were expected to be child carers, and men were expected to be more ruthless and violent. But the idea of a woman becoming ruthless, violent, and evil could allude perhaps to Elizabeth I. And as we were saying earlier, as Shakespeare seemed to write this play with the desire to win favour with James I, the king at the time, creating an evil woman character who leads others to murder in order to gain power would lead to comparisons with Elizabeth I. The Queen, previous to James, even gave a speech to her troops at Tilbury before the Armada where she said, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." And that has real connotations here with "unsex me here, make me more manly." Furthermore, such a negative portrayal of Elizabeth I would prove popular with James, because his mother was imprisoned and executed by Elizabeth to solidify Elizabeth's claim to the throne. Very similar to Lady Macbeth's grab for power here. Okay, so again, the themes played with here are power and gender and the occult. Lady Macbeth goes on to say, "Come to my woman's breast and take my milk for gall." Again, these are imperatives, come, take. But the juxtaposition of milk for gall emphasizes the gender role reversal that Lady Macbeth desires. And the desire to lose womanly virtues and take on violent virtues expected only from men would go against the Shakespearean gender expectations, where women were expected to be nurturing and caring. And again, the refuting of nurturing qualities could once more allude to Elizabeth I, who was childless and therefore showed no mothering qualities. The themes this relates to, again, would be the Gothic, because it's Gothic transgression, the theme of power, the occult, and gender roles. She also says in this soliloquy, she uses the phrase, "you murdering ministers, wherever in your sightless substances." And the language here is really interesting. The alliterative M on murdering ministers and the sibilant sightless substances both connote sexual desire. The M's having a hint of moaning sounds, and the S's throughout sightless substances make the actor salivate. So both of those things reveal the excitement of Lady Macbeth as she delivers this incantation. social context perhaps here would be that the desire for her to lose her womanly virtues and take on violent virtues of men, again, like earlier I was saying, would go against the Shakespearean audience's gender expectations, as women would be expected to be nurturing and caring. The themes involved here would be Gothic, the Gothic transgression, it would be power, occult, and gender. At the end of this scene, she says to Macbeth, "Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." The juxtaposition of innocent flower and the prelapsarian serpent emphasises the deviousness of Lady Macbeth's intended plan. And social context-wise, this is a really interesting one, because the reference to the flower and serpent is particularly apt because the Dutch government in 1606 produced a coin in celebration of the foiling of the gunpowder plot in 1605, which happened in England when Guy Fawkes attempted to overthrow the government and blow up Parliament. And they issued a coin, and the coin they issued to celebrate the foiling of this attempt and show their allegiance alliance with England and Scotland was a coin which had on one side a flower and on the other side a snake. Quotation also has links to the theme of Gothic and power. Right, at the end of Act 1, Scene 5, and this is kind of more of your A-star, or what would be called now an 8 or a 9 grade type point. Lady Macbeth ends the scene saying these lines: "Only look up clear, to alter favour ever is to fear, leave all the rest to me." Now, in Shakespeare, in all of his plays, he usually ends his scenes with a rhyming couplet, which would be in pentameter. That's 10 syllables a line. Here, Lady Macbeth delivers a conventional rhyming couplet in the 10-syllable line, per line, to end the scene. But then Shakespeare, so look, here's the rhyming couplet. Shakespeare then subverts his own convention by adding a 6-syllable line to the end here. Leave all the rest to me. The monosyllabic instruction that is added on echoes the meter, the rhythm used by the witches, and sticks out because we're expecting the scene to end at the end of that rhyming couplet, because that's what normally happens in Shakespeare's plays. And therefore, this echo of the meter of the witches emphasises Lady Macbeth's sort of embracing of the witch's evil, or the way she's being possessed by this evil, and also her control of the situation. Now, social context-wise, the Shakespearean audience would be aware of the break from the pentameter, and therefore the extra 6-syllable line would be very effective in signifying Lady Macbeth's alignment with the witches. The theme this would link to is Gothic transgression, that she's turning to witchcraft ideas, the idea of occult, and also perhaps the gender roles, that she's telling Macbeth to leave the rest to her. Okay, Act 1, Scene 6, Duncan arrives, they welcome him. In Act 1, Scene 7, we see Macbeth begin the scene with a soliloquy where he's doubting whether he should kill Duncan, and he goes over in his mind the several reasons why he should not kill Duncan. But he begins that soliloquy with, "If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly." So, the monosyllabic line that begins Macbeth's soliloquy is broken by the one polysyllabic word, and that's quickly, which emphasises the concerns Macbeth has about the murder of Duncan, that he wants it over and done with. Also, the repetition of the word done, which we see here, 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 3 times, emphasises how Macbeth does not even want to imagine the deed. He's kind of disgusted by the idea, he just wants it done. And he knows that the act is going to bring uncontrollable consequences. So the social context we could relate to this is that the doubts Macbeth exhibits fit with the views of James I, that regicide, killing the king, was a grave sin. As James had written in the Divine Right of Kings, that kings were appointed by God. The social context relating to this would be Gothic transgression and power. Further on in the soliloquy, he observes that by killing Duncan, the act commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. The metaphorical language here highlights Macbeth's concerns that murdering Duncan will cause awful consequences. The social context here would be that the doubts, again, as I was saying on the previous one, the doubts Macbeth's exhibiting fit totally with James I's views, as he wrote about in The Divine Right of Kings. The themes you could link this with would be perhaps Gothic, with the idea of murder and poisoned chalice, power, and perhaps even fate, that by doing this you would be condemning yourself to a destiny of punishment. Now, Macbeth then has Lady Macbeth come in, and he says to her, we're not going to do it, I've decided we're not doing it. That's my paraphrasing, obviously. And Lady Macbeth questions him about this, and he tries to keep control of this exchange. And he says, "Prithee, peace. I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none." And even just the first two words where he tries to tell his wife to stop talking, he says, "Prithee, peace." And the alliteration of the plosive sounds, "prithee, peace," to peas, it emphasizes how Macbeth is insulted and how he is trying to take control of her annoyance with him, and how offended he is by her insulting his manliness. The social context that would relate to this is that the questioning of Macbeth's manhood forces the audience to consider the gender roles in the play and in society. The themes that this would connect to are power and gender. Lady Macbeth tries to manipulate Macbeth, and successfully does, by questioning his manhood and taking control of the situation. And she says, one of the lines she says is, "When you durst do it, then you were a man." Now, the monosyllabic line and alliterative, plosive phrase, "durst do it," they both emphasize Lady Macbeth's insulting accusation. Now, the context of this would be that Shakespeare has Lady Macbeth skillfully manipulate her husband by questioning his masculinity, as women in Jacobean society would rarely voice their disgust at their husbands, as they were expected to obey their husbands, as they lived in a very patriarchal society. The themes this relates to are power and gender. Two more to go for this act. So, Act 1, Scene 7 still. Now, just to really round the point home, Lady Macbeth says one of the most shocking lines in the whole play. She's talking about if she promised to do something, she would go through with it. And one of the examples she gives is, I would, talking about a baby this is, her own baby, she said, "I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out." Now, there's so many things you could point out within this quotation. For a start, the horrific juxtaposition of her nursing a child and then violently killing it, which is also emphasized by the onomatopoeic dashed his brains out and plucked. This demonstrates the psychotic nature of Lady Macbeth and her determination to have her murderous plan enacted. In many ways, how can Macbeth argue with this? She's not someone to be argued with coming out with stuff like this. The social context this would relate to, again, turns back to Elizabeth I, with her being a woman but showing very little womanly virtues, the fact that she was murderous and executed James's own mother. All of that's relevant. And it's also got the idea of gender politics in Shakespearean society as well, that a Shakespearean audience would be very shocked to hear a woman saying such violent language as women would be expected to be nurturing and kind and looking after children, and here she is saying she would kill a child violently if she promised to do so. So the themes involved here are power, gender, politics and violence. So that's the end of the quotations I've selected from Act 1. Now I know that was really long, but actually the other acts I've selected far fewer quotations, because Act 1 has most of the important quotations that I'd recommend knowing for the play. I hope that helps. There are on the website, there's a written version of this if you want it, but it's worth you putting your own one together and taking notes from what I've said, because it will help you process it. Good luck, and I hope that helps. Any questions, let me know.